Okay, Han Shih, thanks for the presentation. I'm just curious about this recent events like Australia PM and Britain PM. They actually paid Xi Jinping a visit. So are they at the global south lah? So the new term for like Australia, maybe African nation, seem to be pivoting to China. Would you agree with that view?
Yes, I generally agree. I think Trump's unpredictable policies and his threats of tariffs on various countries are driving countries like Britain and Canada to China. And Trump has threatened Canada with lots of tariffs if Canada gets too close to China. But if more and more countries, especially Western countries, pivot to China, in my opinion, there's a limit to how much Trump can punish them before hurting America itself.
Does the audience have any questions for Han Shih? Anybody?
So if
Uh,
all
y-
these,
yeah, go ahead.
so if all these countries pivot to China, it's good for China, and Trump loses some of his like hold over them, right, by threatening them with tariffs.
Yes, I agree with that. Yes.
I mean, tariffs can only be used, as you say, lah, to a certain extent. After a while, it just loses its potency, lah. I think Ram, you had a question.
I understand the background, Monroe Doctrine and what is happening. How do you see this playing out? Are we seeing America going back to the pre-19th century politics, where they focus on Western Hemisphere focus, and the rest of the world have these own clusters of political powers, the middle powers having their own. Russia has its own sphere of influence. China has its own sphere. Or is this just a creation? There's something that's happened due to an individual, and the world is going back to what it was.
Do you catch the question?
Yeah. I think it's only partly true. It's true that Trump is kind of like retreating to a partial isolationism, and he's giving China more space in the Indo-Pacific. But Trump says that he wants to safeguard strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific by having more and more economic ties with Asian countries like Singapore. Although he doesn't name Singapore explicitly, but as I said, although he claims he's going to have a free and open, capitalist, market-driven kind of economic relations with Indo-Pacific countries, I mean, from his track record, it's quite obvious he uses strong arm tactics to try to like muscle and pressure countries do his bidding economically. But having said that, I think the chances of war between America are much less now, which is a good thing. Be quite, he's not going to have a very rational kind of alliance like the Seattle Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. They tried it in the 50s and failed. He wouldn't have any formal alliance. I mean, he says he wants to strengthen the relationship with the AUKUS countries, but
Marcus, you got any questions?
Sorry, just like to add
Yeah, to speak up.
possibly just a little bit of context. My first question to Han Shih is, how far do you think Trump's doctrine will last past Trump? I mean, Trump is already facing a potential third power.
Oops, I think he dropped off. Hold on a second. Okay, you are back. We see you.
Just repeat again. My question is about context, and the context becomes. So my first question is, how far do you think Trump's doctrine will last past Trump? That's one. how far do you think Trump's doctrine will last past the midterms when he's facing a third bar? That's 2. And 3, if you look at Trump's economic doctrine and tariffs, it's basically some guy who failed his economics 101. I mean, the way he thinks is only in terms of trade, in terms of goods, hard goods. If I buy more than you and sell more than if you sell more to me and I buy more to you, therefore I'm ripping you off. Therefore you're ripping me off. So he charges 10% on a country like Colombia that can only export coffee and bananas, and it's like a trade surplus and a trade deficit in his mind is not based on comparative advantage or the economics that all of us understand. It's just based on his notion of economics that if the US, if you sell more to the US and the US sells more to you, therefore you are ripping off the US. So it's a bit hard to work around somebody who's got such a basic infantile understanding of the world of economics, of trade, of comparative advantage that most of us have studied economics that makes sense to us, but for some reason it doesn't make sense to him. So are we trying too hard to understand him, or should we just say that he's an idiot? We just have to wait past 2 years, wait for the midterms in the US to throw him out, and then after that we just recover, hide the rate, try not to offend him. Hopefully it all blows over, and the next person that comes in will revert maybe a bit more nationalistic, but at least it will not be so petulant, it will not be so childish, and it will have some economic sense. I mean, if we talk about tariffs, the US has always imposed tariffs. It would impose tariffs on China for steel on a sector-by-sector, case-by-case basis. But for Trump, it's like everybody, I don't care, just 10% straight. And some of it is so economically illogical, it just shows that he doesn't understand comparative advantage, he doesn't understand Ricardo, he doesn't understand big trade now, basically. So what are the chances you think that the US after Trump will revert to a more nationalistic, more terrorist maybe, but a more...
Well, I look at it this way, okay? He's got into a few things.
Han Shih,
Well, I think
your
Sorry.
connection not that stable.
Can you listen? Can you hear me?
Yeah, now okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, I think that Trump is in his final term, so he might do a few things for the midterm elections to win votes for his party, but he doesn't really care that much because this is his final term. So he doesn't need to do things that please the population that much. So he might do things. But having said that, I think, for example, if his trade policies create too much inflation on American consumers, Americans find inflation too high, then the stock market crashes, it might engender a big global financial crisis. I think Trump will get a lot of pushback from Wall Street and American voters and his fellow Republican Party members. And then that will force Trump to reverse course. So, Trump is constrained in that respect. And then the next government that comes in, whether it's Republican or Democrat, I mean, they'll have to pick up the pieces. They will see how damaging the tariffs have been on the American economy, whether it's really hurt American voters and consumers, whether it's made inflation unbearably high. If it has, they will reverse course and call off the tariffs. But the trick is how much have the tariffs hurt the Americans and how much has it increased inflation by?
Leo, go ahead.
I just want to interject. I personally think that Trump is not an idiot because not because I'm schooled in economics or anything, but if we took a step back and saw things from about 100 or 150 years ago, probably Ricardo would say, this guy, his economic policy is mercantilistic. And perhaps he is actually in a mode of reversion. How I'm seeing it is with regards to Trump, how I'm seeing it is when he's using trade and carriers as a weapon, he's basically, it just has to follow a direction of colonization. And even up to today, if you were going to consider about other European countries, let's talk about the African franc, which is run by the French. It's the same form of tariff. It's only masked with a mask of monetary control. Now, my question that really bugs me is with regards to Monroe Doctrine, there's two aspects. One is during the time of the First World War, because Monroe, the original Monroe Doctrine was that the Americans would do their own little thing and not get involved in Europe. But in the First World War, they got involved in Europe. Would you see that the Americans would, what's the term? Would they fudge their position and the Monroe Doctrine is actually just an excuse? Or they're going to focus in Latin America and become the primacy hegemon in the area because they do not see that they can project power when nation states are all growing very, very quickly in many, many ways. It's not like 100 or 200 years ago or even 50 years ago. So that's my first burning question. My second question is with regards to the Marshall Plan, because the Americans have always, I think after the Second World War, they have, they're very, very much involved in the Marshall Plan. And this time with Greenland, what is happening, whether they're just, it's an excuse, and Trump is going to make use of an excuse to say, we're pulling out of Europe. We're no longer giving loans to Europe. Europe's no longer the place that it is concentrating on. And that all the Latin American colonies of the United States, that's where they're going to focus all their energies on. That's my second question. And of course, as a third question, as a fellow Singaporean, we all wonder, because I think that the DOJ also has got certain cases against some of the companies that are based, they're headquartered here in Singapore, but also are operating in South America. Would that give some business leaders some hesitancy when dealing with Americans? And how they should work with regards to their operations in Latin America and so forth. I shall not go into the specifics of which company that is. I think fellow Singaporeans, they would know. Yeah. So these are my three questions.
Well, I mean, first of all, the previous administration of Joe Biden and his State Secretary Anthony Blinken sought to contain China by having all these alliances, a bit like NATO, containing the Soviet Union in the Cold War. But Trump's just abandoned that completely. And he is focusing a lot on the Western Hemisphere, that's for sure. But it doesn't mean he has completely ignored the rest of the world. I mean, look at what he's doing to Iran. He so far hasn't attacked Iran yet, but he's got a huge number of aircraft carriers and warships and planes surrounding Iran. So that's clearly putting pressure on Iran. And I think this is part of actually his strategic game competition with China, not to go to war with China. But if he brings regime change in Iran, there'll be a new Iranian government that'll be friendly to America and Israel. And then a lot of the oil in Iran will come under America's control. I mean, Venezuela, the oil in Venezuela has come under America's control, which strengthens the petrodollar and strengthens the status of the America as the global currency, reserve currency, although right now the US dollar exchange rate is very weak. So actually, if Trump actually creates regime change in Iran, he will have access to Iranian oil. That will strengthen the US petrodollar and strengthen the US dollar as a global reserve currency. So vis-a-vis the renminbi, the yuan, will relatively speaking be less powerful against the American US dollar. So clearly, Trump is still engaged in economic competition with China, and he has not completely neglected the rest of the world outside the Western Hemisphere. One very interesting thing about the Monroe Doctrine, which is Trump's version of the Monroe Doctrine, is that his latest national security strategy emphasized control of strategic assets in the Western Hemisphere. That would refer to the oil in Venezuela and the Panama Canal, which is very, very different and a big addition to the original Monroe Doctrine. The original Monroe Doctrine just tells the European colonial powers, don't come and interfere in the Western Hemisphere. But now Trump's Monroe Doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine, says he wants to gain control of strategic assets at the Panama Canal and Venezuelan oil. And obviously, and then your question about the long arm of the American law. Well, that's the thing. That's another way Trump's going to project power around the world, including Southeast Asia. I mean, recently the U.S. Department of Justice named this Cambodian scam group headed by this mainland Chinese bondman Kheng Shih as a criminal, and Singapore jumped on and Hong Kong and Korea jumped on the bandwagon and arrested people and confiscated assets. But that also, in some ways, weakens the case of Hun Sen. I'm not going to, and his son, the Prime Minister of Cambodia, Hun Mane. I mean, I'm not going to directly accuse them of colluding with Kheng Shih or the Prince Group because I don't have hard evidence. But Hun Sen was photographed with this guy Kheng Shih, and he was given a kind of aristocratic Cambodian title and a Cambodian citizenship. So although and recently, of course, Hun Sen says that Cambodia will oppose scamming and it's not going to welcome scammers. But I think this kind of, in some ways, weakens the power of Hun Sen and his son, Prime Minister Hun Mane. So if they can do that to Cambodia, they can do that to Malaysia. Look at the 1MDB scandal. It caused the downfall of Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak. So now I'm not going to accuse the Singapore government of corruption or money laundering because I don't want to be sued for libel. But the long arm of the American law can apply to any country. I mean, hypothetically and potentially speaking, Singapore. Well, we have to ask: will Singapore be the next target in future? Although I'm not accusing the Singapore government of abetting money laundering or scam groups or corruption. Look, America has arrested the Hong Kong minister, Patrick Ho, and put him in American jail. And they've also put in prison an African minister. I think his name is a Guinean minister. So, America's long arm of the law, American law, can kind of like weaken foreign governments in Southeast Asia and shift them away from China.
Okay, thanks. Because we only have, go ahead, Khengsoon.
Han Shih, I got a few interconnected questions. From the point of view of world history, the West has dominated the world for the last 400 years at least, with colonialism, and then now with neo-colonialism, and then now with a kind of US global hegemony, which is in a kind of crisis, right? So that I think that the world has reached a historically transformative moment. Just as the Industrial Revolution changed the whole of the West, right? Today, I think we are entering into information revolution, which is changing everything. Primarily, US dollar is serious trouble. Okay. So the questions that I arise from this is: number one, since you are in Hong Kong and close to the Chinese situation, is China an imperialist power? Number one. Number two, what is the status of American imperialism? The Venezuela situation seems to suggest a kind of desperation from a historical point of view. And finally, what is the
Give me a second. Just connecting the. Yeah, go ahead.
finally, what is the US-China contestation really about? Is it about the decline of one kind of political order versus the rise of a totally different kind of political order in which so-called democracy is in crisis? What's your view?
Well, let me first talk about currencies, okay? Trump's national security strategy explicitly say they want to uphold the power of the American dollar as a global reserve currency. So he did that by raiding Venezuela and forcing Venezuelan oil to come under American control, which is a very imperialist and colonialistic. This is what the French and British empires did in the past. And that strengthens the US dollar. Having said that, the US dollar exchange rate is now very weak. More and more countries like Malaysia and Middle Eastern countries are making more use of the renminbi, but it's still a small percentage of the total circulation of currencies in the world. America's dollar is still dominant. And then you ask me whether China's an imperialist power. I said that in my first book and also a bit in my second book. Both America and China are semi-empires, although the way Trump is behaving, America is becoming more and more of a European-style empire. China cannot be a full empire. Chinese weakness is clearly demonstrated in the Western Hemisphere. There's nothing China can do to prevent Trump from dominating the Panama Canal, as previous Americans like Theodore Roosevelt have done so. I mean, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said, they're going to uphold the rights of Li Ka-shing's company because it's a Chinese company, but ultimately it will fail. Trump will ultimately beat off any attempts by China to wrest back control of the Panama Canal. So China, in that sense, is not a full-fledged empire. But China's soft economic power is increasing because Trump's erratic policies are driving so many countries like Britain and Canada and Spain to China. And so China is a kind of a semi-empire the way Britain kind of dominated economically Argentina in the early 20th century. I mean, Argentina nominally was an independent country. It wasn't a colony of Britain like India or Singapore was. But the Argentinian economy is so heavily dominated by Britain. British companies and British railway companies control the Argentinian economy. And that's the way China is becoming in some countries around the world. Yes.
Does China have colonies?
No, but I mean, as I said, Argentina was not a colony of Britain, but it was so heavily dominated economically by Britain. So, trade and investment by China might, dominate certain countries around the world that Britain did with Argentina.
Sorry, Khengsoon, because I want to give you some time for your presentation, so we only have the room.
So the notion of colonization is now in question, right? Because the way power is exercised is quite different from the way power was exercised, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so China is a different kind of global power, not an imperialist power.
It's an economic power. It's very interesting because, I just recently read a book about the love-hate relationship between Venice and the Ottoman Empire. And they did fight some wars, but there was also economic competition between them. I think there's partial parallels between the economic competition between China and America and Venice and the Ottoman Empire.
Okay, I really got to interject, and then we have to start Khengsoon on his presentation.